Okay. Hello. If you are not speaking, can you mute, please? We'll give it a few minutes. Okay. Hello, everybody. I see you. Welcome. We're super excited to have you. Good, good, good. It's going to be a really good night. If you guys are feeling a little, you want to type some things into the chat, please tell us your name, where you're from, and one word of how you're feeling right now. Should be able to put it in the chat. Upland. Oh, great. Okay, cool. Wary. Yep. Howdy. Hello. Hi, John. Mesquite, Nevada. Wow. Welcome, Anne. Nice to see you. Sonoma. Very excited. Cool. Feeling tired and need some sleep. I can understand that. Just over 8. Okay, well, sure. We're good with that. Los Angeles. I see you, Rebecca. Great, 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 great. All right, cool. So, we had Gabby from Tahunga. Welcome. From Oakland, Indivisible. Tongvaland. Yep, I was just gonna say that. Kayla, frustrated. Yep. I understand. Okay. All right. So we're going to do live stream. Dave in Pasadena. All right, great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. So we'll go ahead and get started. We actually made this into a webinar because we got a massive amount of RSVPs, which is great. So that tells me that there's a huge hunger. My name is Michelle. I want to recognize the land that I'm on, which is Tongva land. And I want to welcome you. We have a really special guest. Like, we're not going to really do any of our group business. We're going to just turn it over to an amazing speaker, author, David Pepper, who is going to walk us through his book and what's at stake, how we can address it, because we certainly can, and how it all works. So he's going to give us like an inside look. I'm going to ask you guys if you could put your questions into the Q&A. That would be super helpful. Please don't put them in the chat. It's hard to follow. It's better if they're in the Q&A. And then I'm sure that some of you will also have this same question. So we enabled a little thing where you can upvote. Like, you can upvote a question. So perhaps you have that same question. So that'll help us navigate which questions are most burning. Okay, so with that, I want to do a quick introduction to David Pepper. For those of you who don't know him, he was former councilman, mayor, county commissioner, and head of the Democratic State Party in Ohio. So he's in Ohio right now. So it's 10:30 p.m. So God bless him. And he's also a lawyer. And so he's won a lot of important debates battling defending democracy in court. And, his book, Laboratories of Autocracy, is a wake-up call from behind the lines. So he's speaking truth because he has seen it behind the lines. And, this book actually stands out as arguably one of the most important books of our time for 3 particular reasons. One is it brings the subject down to earth, right? Because it's very overwhelming, all of this. It connects democratic erosion to corruption and the decline in America's quality of life. I know that's sad, but there's hope in here, I promise. And it provides a wealth of ideas of how to fight back to protect our democracy. So knowledge is power. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to the great David Pepper and take it away.
Thank you so much, Michelle. You guys see me, I hope. Well, first, let me just say I'm really honored to be with you tonight. Indivisible played an enormous role in our wins here that ultimately led to the last attempt at gerrymander getting struck down in our state. It was an army of indivisible groups that gathered hundreds of thousands of petitions that changed our Ohio Constitution. So I always love talking to indivisible groups and members. Secondly, I am here tonight because I share a lot of the emotions that have already been shared on your chat room, both inspired, and feeling good, but also frustrated. And I wrote my book that I had no intention of writing because I was so frustrated by what I was seeing in Ohio around the country that I don't think people were really seeing as needed to be seen. Last April, I literally, I teach, I write novels, honestly, and I have one coming out this June. I didn't have a plan on writing a book, but I was watching the nonstop attacks on democracy, and I thought someone needs to capture what's happening in a way that really breaks through. And that's what I ended up writing, and I'm thrilled to be speaking around the country on this. My hope is, and the book kind of does this, there's a lot of darkness and sort of frustration in the book. But the whole point is, once you see what's happening, all the energy that I know you all have, that I have, we'll spend it better solving the real problem, as opposed to simply doing the same thing that too many have been doing for too long, which isn't being successful. And one of the things I love about indivisible groups is a lot of this you'll have already been saying for too long, but most aren't listening. So I'm going to walk through a PowerPoint for a little bit. I will maybe, if some questions are relevant to a page, I'll take them up. But then I'll have a whole hour after the PowerPoint. As long as people want to speak, I'll stay on to talk through any questions you have. So let me attempt to share a screen here and get going on the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint, guys? Is it up? Okay. So let me just start with a hypothetical here. Try and move this other thing over. So what if a country did all the following things? The country rigged almost every legislative election so the result was guaranteed, and a minority would stay in power even if they got a minority of the votes. Or what if that country attacked the independent operations of elections and the counting of votes, or attacked the means by which the voters they consider the opposition voted, or attacked protesters of the opposition party, attacked independent courts, violated the elected will of their own electorate that had been voted through referenda, violated their own constitution repeatedly? What if that country changed laws to protect themselves from being held accountable for corruption, or even censored elements of history out of their history to cover up things they didn't like? If a country did all of those things, first of all, you may be thinking, well, yeah, we know about countries like that, Hungary, Viktor Orban, Putin, etc. And we see those countries and we kind of call that stuff out. But I go through this list, and you'll all, I think, recognize this. I just described all these states and many more. This is what the state of state houses in our country of our United States are behaving like right now. Every one of these features that we would see so clearly in other countries are happening in state after state after state. And yes, we recognize some of them, like the third one, the attack on voting rights. We are horrified by the recent book bans, but what we haven't seen is taking the step back to see that all of these are happening at one time, which should make us see what we're seeing is a full-out attack on the basic principles and bedrock, foundation of democracy in state after state after state. It is happening right now at breakneck speed, and that's why I wrote the book, and that's why we all have to start acting in a way maybe more fierce than we have ever, as much as we've all been part of activism. So the point of this book is, there is a crisis in American democracy. And to borrow from that old phrase from the Clinton years, it's not the economy is stupid, it's the state house is stupid. That's where the attack is happening. Yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene is horrible. Yes, Lauren Boebert is doing terrible things, but they're in the minority and they're largely just talking. It's in state houses where people just like them, as extreme as they are in the majority passing laws. And we spend far too much time watching the crazy in DC and not nearly enough seeing where the crazy is actually passing laws, which is in all these state houses that basically correspond to that red map on the book title, on the book cover. So let me walk through the backdrop here. Some of you will know this, but the reason I wrote the book is most Americans do not. State houses end up, if you take a close look at them, in many ways being the Achilles heel of American governance. And I don't say that lightly. There are a lot of good people in state houses. I have friends in your state house. It's not because a lot of good people aren't trying to serve there, but institutionally, there's a problem with them. And it's a problem that goes back to the founding days of our country. Now, this is not the problem, but there's a reality to them that most people don't appreciate. State houses do have enormous power. They control everything from the economy, tax policy, regulation, healthcare, education at all levels, energy, climate. State houses actually have control over almost every issue that we care about in politics and in our lives. Social issues like Roe v. Wade, for example, same-sex marriage was all about state houses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a whole lot of power that is often overlooked. They have another set of powers that's even more overlooked, and it's given to them by the Constitution. Our states have a major power over democracy itself. They are sort of the first draft of the election rules of all, both state and federal elections. As we're all watching, they draw the district lines of our Congress as well as their own state houses. And they clearly, as Donald Trump figured out too late, control the electoral college process to many degrees. By the way, you'll see at the bottom here, what I'm talking about corresponds to the chapters in the book. And I'm gonna add some links because nothing I say tonight will replace actually reading the book. I think those of you who've read the book will agree. But so the other thing the state houses have power over that is often overlooked is, yes, the federal government does a lot, but the state house has a massive role in shaping how federal money is spent in those states. If you want Medicaid expansion in the state, you need a state house to approve it. It doesn't just happen automatically. They also have a huge amount of power, and it varies a little bit in states, but these state houses, as I'll talk about in Ohio, can run over governors. They can pass their own laws, overcome vetoes, use political leverage. In a lot of states like Ohio, we've seen more moderate governors get run over by an extreme state house, for example. They also, in a lot of states, can ride herd over local governments. We've had in Ohio local governments try and pass, plastic bag bans. Well, the state house made such bans illegal. They do that with gun laws. So they have an enormous amount of power. But the Achilles heel comes in, and then almost no one knows who these people are. So we have a lot of power, and this is sort of a spin on that old Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, in the state houses, great power, great anonymity. The elections are basically low profile. The state house and local press corps are dying to a degree that there's almost no coverage of these places. Many of them, the state capital is far away. Many of them have very short legislative sessions. These people are known much more if they're a lawyer in town or a funeral home director than what they're doing at the state house. So we have this problem that these bodies with a whole lot of power have almost total anonymity. People don't know who their state house member is. They don't know what the state house does. Well, that mismatch in power and anonymity is a huge problem in any sort of system of democratic governance. Here's the other problem, though. Insiders know exactly what these people do. There are private interests. There are social policy groups like the NRA or extreme anti-choice groups, others that are posted up in these state houses, and they know exactly how powerful these people are. And in Ohio, we've seen that through, for-profit online charter schools that give a huge amount of money to get money sent their way. They know what state houses do, but people back home have no idea that the reason their school district is losing money is because that's happening. And so there's this mismatch. They're very powerful. Most people couldn't name them out of a lineup, but special interests are in those state capitals knowing exactly what they're doing. That is that's a toxic combination, it turns out, in current American politics. And then I'm going to throw another, so I'm going to keep going negative for a while, so just be prepared. I'm going to throw another piece about how broken they are beyond what I just described right here. Gerrymandering's existed in our country forever, but it took an especially terrible turn, extreme turn in 2011. Right when we were selling Obama winning, Karl Rove was plotting to take over state houses in the 2010 election, and he succeeded. And with those wins in 2011, with the modern mapping technologies, they gerrymandered these states more than we've ever seen in our history. And I'll just give an example of how bad it is. And these kind of these numbers really tell the very bleak story. It's a very useful comparison, 2008 and 2012. Why? Obama won each of these states by about the same amount in both years. And so it shows us that while Ohio's blue map or Michigan's blue map largely stayed the same, the districting changed, and that meant the outcomes changed. So just as examples, Ohio in 2008 had 10 members of Congress that were Democrats, 8 were Republican. 4 years later, Obama wins the same amount, about the same blue map, 12 Republican, 4 Democrats. That 12-4 remained the same all decade. Michigan went from 8-7 to 5-9. Pennsylvania, you see the numbers. They gerrymandered so badly that the same blue map literally had a reverse or worse in terms of who represented Ohio in Congress. The same story in the state house. Majorities, large majorities in some case, same blue in 08, same blue map in 2012, Obama winning the same amount, converted by extreme gerrymandering into minorities or super minorities, even though these states were still blue statewide. That's how extreme the new round of gerrymandering was. Now I'm going to make it even worse for a second. It's not only the overall control that they guaranteed themselves, and this is one of the key insights, I think, of the book. They guaranteed themselves that almost not a single member of these state house majorities to a person is ever in a real election. This is the average margin of victory. So they basically, if you look on the right, they basically drew themselves about 62 districts that they would always have. This is the breakdown in the margins of victory of those 62 districts over a decade. You'll see an extreme amount, how extremely lopsided. 50 of those districts averaged a 60 or 40 or better outcome, meaning they never even think about the next election. 17 or 50% or more margins of victory. And then you get to 62 where it's 10% or better in each time. So you're literally talking about, no exaggeration, a generation of people in office in states like Ohio, but many others, who to a person have actually never been in an election, is the way you and I would define one. They haven't really been part of democracy. And it turns out that if that's your only experience, well, of course, you're scared of real elections. You're scared of democracy. And if you go back to what I said before, you have a power over democracy, you're going to use that power to make sure you don't have real elections going forward, because that's what you're scared of. That's really what we've been stuck with. And I'll talk about how warped this has made politics in these states in a second. But there's one other piece I want to throw in to show you how bad the gerrymandering is. In 2018, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and overall, we had a big blue year, right? I mean, you had blue years. You won congressional districts out there that you hadn't before. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania each elected a Democratic governor. But even more than that, the voters, when you look at who they voted for, a majority of voters of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin voted for a Democrat for the state house by 5, 11, and 9 points. The gerrymandering is so extreme in those states that even when the voters voted that way, the Republicans retained power because the districts were so bad. And look at Wisconsin. 54% of the voters voted for a Democrat. 64 out of 100 districts were Republican. That's literally a system that Orban and Hungary would admire. Wow, good job. You kept the majority even though you're not the majority. That's how bad the districts are. And one other point on all these maps is almost across the board, I'd say in Ohio, 98% of the districts drawn, going back to this one slide, on the right. Of all these districts drawn for the entire decade, 98% of them turned out as drawn in 2011. They almost never get it wrong. So you basically have in these states a decade without democracy. And here's the broader point that comes with that. We have a set of incentives that we expect lead to good behavior in public officials from democracy. In democracy, where you have a real election, your public outcomes should matter as a public official because you get reelected because you deliver good results, right? Well, in a system where you do not have democracy, it turns out that public outcomes don't matter because they have no choice back home anyway. So if the small town back home is dying, if there's no infrastructure, if the healthcare is terrible, if public education is floundering, it doesn't matter. You get reelected. And that's what we've seen is there's no correlation anymore between delivering good public outcomes, as we expect officials to do, and actually your election. That's to decouple those things is really dangerous. And it's why I said earlier, and Michelle repeated it, we are seeing a absolute downward spiral collapse in public outcomes in states like Ohio that essentially have not had a democracy for a decade. Our school system, for example, was 5th ranked around 2010. We're now 26th in the country. Collapse. You saw people freeze to death in Texas when the energy grid fell apart. A collapse. But the people get reelected no matter what. But on the flip side, while public outcomes don't matter, there's a powerful incentive to serve the private interests in these state capitals. You give the public money to the private for-profit school operator. He helps you stay in office, even if the people back home in your district have no idea why their school is underfunded. So there's this terrible incentive to help these private players. Again, the energy companies in Texas that wanted the private grid, the trickle-down economic policies they all want. That means you're defunding, infrastructure. You serve those people, you do well, and your public outcomes collapsing don't really matter. It turns out there's also another thing that doesn't matter. If something's unpopular, like attacking Roe v. Wade is unpopular almost everywhere, or insane gun laws that would never survive in a 50-50 district, in this world without democracy, those things are fine because you can't get voted out of office anyway. And in the book, I go through examples where they passed things that were disastrous politically, but no one who voted for them lost their next office because they're in districts they can't lose. On the flip side, though, those groups have figured out, hey, state houses are the place to do really unpopular things. So they go to these people and they say, hey, we want you to pass it here, and they reward you for it. So now you have an incentive to do deeply unpopular things because the private people who know what you're doing pay attention. But back home, you can't get booted out of office anyway, so it doesn't matter. So there's an incentive to be extreme. There's no incentive to work across party lines. And I won't go through all of these, but there's also, it turns out, a powerful incentive to attack democracy at every turn, because you can never get away with this behavior if you were in a real democracy. You would lose your office. Bad public outcomes, being too extreme, would mean you're out of office if you had a real democracy. So one other incentive to keep all this going is keep democracy at bay. That's a very powerful incentive we see play out all the time. So that's okay. I'm going one more level of negative, and then I'll start lifting you back up. Here's the especially, okay, so I've gone through some negatives. Achilles heel of American governance, great power, no one knows what they do except for interests, and they are locked into power because of that gerrymandering no matter what they do, and the incentives are truly warped. It's worse, though, because not only are each of these states behaving the way I just described, that are these laboratories of autocracy, and you've all heard of ALEC, I'm sure. You wouldn't be on this call and part of Indivisible. But what ALEC and other groups have done, it's not just ALEC, is they understand everything I just said. And they understood it decades ago. And they have created organizations to take advantage of everything I just described and to weaponize these state houses to serve their agenda. That's what ALEC is. There are two ways I think about ALEC. One is it's privatized legislation where it's all written by private players and sent to these state houses. But more deeply than that, it's a weaponization of this Achilles heel of American governance. So these groups can accomplish their substantive goals that we talked about. What are their substantive goals? Loosening gun laws. A lot of it is about climate change, not allowing any response to deal with climate change. Privatizing education, attacking healthcare, undermining consumers, trickle down, attacking reproductive rights. These are goals that would be very hard to achieve in a robust democracy because almost every one of these goals is unpopular, deep minority views. But if you're one of these groups, you figure out, well, I know my goals, and they know this. They know they're unpopular, but they think to themselves, well, if it's unpopular, state houses will do it for me, and I'm going to set up a system where I make sure they do. That's what they've done. So they basically harnessed these state houses to accomplish basically a minority worldview and to keep it in places that are so undemocratic, they can sustain pushing all these pieces forward. In other democratic levels, if you tried to get a mayor to do all this stuff, they would be voted out of office. And I think in swing states, you'd lose as well. But in gerrymandered rigged state houses, they've been doing this for decades. And here's what they've learned. And my book is I call laboratories, not just to play off the old term laboratories of democracy, but because they are functioning as laboratories. They're always learning from their own experiences. If there's a mistake, they correct for it. If someone does something really well in one state, other states will copy it. They are operating that way. So in my book, I go through these lessons on a repeated basis. They've learned, just like I said earlier, hey, it doesn't matter if an issue is unpopular. These state houses will do it. So they pass unpopular after unpopular issue, it gets done. Now, they do like secrecy because every once in a while, when there's been a blow up, the private donors to these operations get real skittish. So they want to keep what they're doing a secret, not because the politicians care, because they're going to do it no matter what. They're unaccountable. But the donors, actually, the big companies, some of them at least, especially consumer-facing ones, they don't want the heat if they were part of some crazy gun law or something. Number three is they have learned that legislators, as I said early on, can overrun statewide officials. That it's the state legislature that really can run an issue for them, even if the governor isn't happy about it. Number four, they have learned, and this is an important part, they are most successful when they throw a ton at each of these legislatures, a ton of spaghetti on the wall. Let a couple issues get all the media attention, but the overworked press corps can't cover everything else. So you may have that one really controversial issue get cut from the budget at the last minute, but meantime, 4 or 5 other things passed that never made a headline. That's what they do in Ohio again and again and again. Number 5 is every time you try something anywhere, and this rewards the strategy number 4, you learn from the successes or failures. For example, in Ohio, they tried to attack collective bargaining. They included in those attacks on police and fire unions. That led to the thing going down in flames because the police and fire unions ran TV ads against it. In the future, other states attacking collective bargaining never included police and fire unions because they saw that didn't work in Ohio. Whether it's attacking voting rights or social issues, they're all going to learn from this Roe v. Wade Texas law, right? If it gets struck down, other states will write their laws a little differently to figure out how to not get theirs struck down. So they're always learning. And the last lesson they've learned, and this is a really sobering one, the politicians, as individuals, the politicians in these state houses actually don't matter. Because what they've learned is what I presented earlier. They all respond to the warped incentives in the same way. And so if someone falls out of this office in scandal or is term limited or passes away, the next person in that office does the same thing they would do. In Ohio, we had multiple speakers resign in scandal. The next speaker just kept doing it. So what matters, and that this goes to that bottom line, is not the politicians. It's the lack of democracy and the bad incentives that mean that anyone who fills these offices behaves the same way. And that takes us sort of the final point is, that's why the attacks on democracy are so important for them, because the lack of democracy is what keeps the politicians all behaving in the way that serves their agenda. And this is not just about the presidential election or Congress. This is about preserving power in state houses where all this is happening. And so, it was important in Ohio that they got rid of the Obama coalition, and I won't go through all the details right now, not just because they didn't want Obama to win. It's because the Obama coalition is why we had a state house majority. It's the Obama coalition is why we had a majority of Congress from Ohio. So the reason they're always attacking voters and rigging maps and undermining election outcomes isn't just about the national cause, but they'll do it for that too. It's to preserve their own power. And if you learn anything tonight from what I'm saying, the key to everything they're doing to attack democracy is that they themselves, back in their legislative districts, are never held accountable. It's what allows them to do everything else they do. I won't go through all the details of this, but just to say that the last year of attacks that we have seen, rigging legislative elections, legislating the big lie, doubling down on voting rights attack, this is not new. It's not because of Trump. It's not because of the big lie. I'll go back a slide. It's an extension of 10 years of the same behavior. If you look closely, Obama was what led to all the suppression in 11. And after Democrats won governorships in 16, they started attacking the powers of governorships, which was a prelude to what they're doing now with secretaries of state and others. This behavior has been consistent but accelerating for 12 years. So I'm about to pivot to the positive stuff, but here's a grand summary of politics right now in this country. And I think I'm going to finish right around my half hour. We have two battles happening. We have two sides, but the sides are actually in different battles. And this is maybe the key insight of the whole thing. Our side actually believes with confidence, and has for a long time, that democracy is intact and stable in America, and that our ideas are popular. So if all we do is win elections, we will get what we want substantively. And we're right that almost everything we support is actually popular. That's true. But we've also decided that the most efficient way to achieve what we want is through federal elections for president and Congress and Senate. And so everything we do is about winning the swing districts and the swing states that get us those federal outcomes. We put most of our money into those federal elections, and we focus most intensely on those federal election years, mainly the presidency. And we judge everything we do whether or not we win those races. And when we win, we celebrate like the world is saved. And when we lose, we think everything's a disaster. That's our side. The other side knows, as I've gone through, they know that their worldview is unpopular, that almost every issue they support would not survive in a robust democracy. They're in the minority and they know it. So their battle isn't just about winning elections in a robust democracy. Their battle is over democracy itself. They need it weakened. They need it sort of suppressed so that their minority worldview can be locked into place and not overcome by a majority of people who don't agree with them. If that's their worldview, they have a different strategy, right? Ours is let's go win federal elections, get what we want, most efficient way. They understand everything I just presented. So their battle over democracy starts at the state level. That's where they're fighting, because they know that if they can win state legislatures, they can control major levers, not just over the policies they want to put into place, but over democracy itself, so they can keep those policies locked into place, even if they're deeply unpopular. That's their battle. They don't fight only in federal swing states. They fight in every state. They fight every year, and they understand that far more than Congress people and senators and presidents determine results in their battle. They want Supreme Courts of states. They want state legislators. They want Board of Education, right? They are fighting a different battle, and because their battle is different, they're fighting it broader, longer, more intensely. And the bottom line is, until we get in the battle that they are in and see it for what it is, we will always lose. The people on the right, in what I've described, are always on offense in the state with little pushback. We're not there. And they are winning their battle every single time that it continues on the current path. And so the final part of my book is basically saying, we got to stop. We have to adjust to where the battle really is. And I go through a lot of details here. I won't share them all right now, but one really important point that might surprise people is everything I just described was a concern raised by the founders that state houses could play a role of undermining democracy. James Madison in the Federalist Papers literally wrote that he worried that state houses could become the back door of undermining the nation's democracy for every reason I just described. And they were basing this on the fact that in recent history, state capitals had been a corrupt mess. And so not only did they worry about this, and if you read what Madison wrote, he literally worried about rich, corrupt people from other states dominating other states. It's literally ALEC. It's in the late 1700s, what he's describing. They didn't just worry about it. They literally wrote in the Constitution, they were so worried about it that they wrote this clause, and this clause comes right before where they guarantee the United States will protect states from foreign invasion. They wrote the clause, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. That clause, Republican form of government to them means will of the people. The people are sovereign, not a monarchy, not locked in elites. They were literally saying to Joe Manchin that his oath includes protecting democracy in states. And I point this out. This should be the North Star for all of us. The Constitution guarantees small d democratic governance in every state of the union. And if that's not present, the United States government has a role, has a duty to guarantee that it lifts states, because the founders understood that the lack of democracy at the state level was a risk to the entire nation's democracy. And so when I see the filibuster being used to stop legislation, what would James Madison say to Joe Manchin? Read the damn Constitution. You took an oath to protect democratic governance in states. I don't know what this filibuster is, but it's not in the Constitution. So that's a fundamental point about our Constitution that is being overlooked right now. We've also seen, by the way, what everything described, I won't go through this, the parallels of state level attacks on democracy succeeding should scare every one of us, because it's exactly how Jim Crow started, and the federal government, others didn't respond the way they should. So I go through my book, 30 specific steps. We go through a lot of these in the book. Federal government does have to step up. The federal government, and that's why it's in the Constitution, is the strongest pushback to attacks in states. And that's why we cannot stop pushing senators, and your senators have been great. And we cannot just, because they had one vote, stop pushing for the John Lewis Act, the Freedom of the Vote Act. These are absolutely critical. And we have to, one of my themes in my book is, we have to start acting like there's a crisis. And when you call one vote and walk away, you're not really looking like there's a crisis. All of our leaders start to have to act like the crisis that it is. They need to keep pushing. They should make people stand and debate this stuff for hours on end, nights on end, to show this is democracy at stake and we're acting like it. So the federal government has to step up. But we can't wait for that either, okay? If we wait for the federal government, we're not doing things that we could do. We have to redefine the battle in our mind at the highest level. Speaker Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Jamie Harrison, President Biden, Kamala Harris, we have to do what they're doing and see it as a battle for democracy. And once we do that, so many things change in how we wage that battle. One is you have to be fighting everywhere, not just federal swing areas. That's a mistake that leaves too much of the country out of the battle that they are battling. You have to challenge these laws everywhere. It's not just in swing states. You need to round out the spending in these elections. So it's not just billions in the presidential, but you're helping candidates run all over all the time at all levels. But a couple of the other key insights. Oh, by the way, define the teams differently. And this is not about never Trump. That might have been a good way to defeat Donald Trump. This is bigger than Trump. This started before Trump. It will be happening after he's gone from the scene. That would be like literally saying that when you were battling Jim Crow, that it was the never Andrew Johnson movement. It's too narrow. And what it's done, I'm afraid, there are a lot of Republicans who sound nothing like Donald Trump. They don't act like him, but they're attacking democracy every day. And if we define everything as Trump or not Trump, we are giving a pass to people who are not supporting democracy. But the other thing that we do once we get into this democracy battle, and this is maybe one of the most important takeaway points, it's a long battle. The way the suffragists fought for generations, the way John Lewis and civil rights heroes spent their lifetime. And we can't judge everything by every cycle, by every federal election. And one of the concrete examples of that is Stacey Abrams. She knew the battle for Georgia was a long battle for democracy. She didn't judge her results on whether or not she won that governor's race. She just kept going and going and going and registering more people and engaging more people and knocking on more doors. Even when she didn't win in 18, she told the country, we made progress. We probably all thought she was just trying to be optimistic about a loss. No, she was right. We learned 2 years later how right she was. She had made progress. We have to define everything we're doing as a long battle for democracy, not as a short-term cycle by cycle thing. We've done that in Ohio quite well on a Supreme Court issue I'll talk about, or I'll talk about a Q&A. But what does it mean when you have a long game? It means you run a candidate in every single legislative district, every single election. In a short game, you may not do that because you're not thinking about what you get when everyone runs everywhere. But in a long game, the best thing you can do is run everywhere. In a long game, you treat every candidate as a champion of democracy. You don't just talk to the swing candidates and make them feel good about running. You say to the person in the most gerrymandered district, you're a hero for running in that race. Because you're there, you're going to lift turnout. You're going to get our message out to people who need to hear it. Thank you, and we're going to support you. That's what thinking like a long game looks like. I won't go through all the details. We need to boost local journalism. We need to stop going around paywalls. If there's a good paper doing good state house coverage, now this is less relevant in California, my guess is, but in other states, subscribe. Don't try and read their stuff for free. They're collapsing economically. We need them covering these places. Long game means there's no off-year elections. Every election is a battle for democracy, not just because we're building a bench because they may run for Congress someday, but because so many of these offices actually have a lever on the overall democracy we need to build. Whenever we're in office, we need to do the right thing by democracy. You know, there's some democratic states that still have bad voter laws. Do you know how many times as the Ohio Democratic Party chair trying to push for voter reforms, Republicans threw New York State in my face? They would use it against us. And so my point is, whenever we're in charge of a state, we got to make the laws the model of democracy so that it's not used against us, but we create case studies of why it's easy to vote and we get higher turnout. I won't go through all the other details, but the point is there's so much we could do at the state level, especially in the long game. And the final thing I'll talk about and then go to questions is this. And I'm not at a point where I can see how many people are on the call, but I'm glad there's so many with us. The thing that I would say to think about all the other things you can do, and in the book I go through the specifics, is there's so much more that we can do to lift democracy in our lives than I think we imagine. And the way I would put this is, and I apologize, there's a spelling mistake on one slide here. We all have a footprint in this world of influence. And what I think we can't just wait for Michelle Obama and Stacey Abrams to show up in our state and register voters or do other things, help candidates. We all have a footprint. And that what I put in the book is everyone should challenge themselves. What's their footprint in the political world, in the world generally? And how can they use it to lift democracy? And I give examples. You know, are you on the board of a homeless shelter? Is that homeless shelter registering voters? The food bank? Do you know the mayor of a town? Is that town registering voters or reminding people to vote early? They should be. Ask your friend, the mayor, are you? And if they're not, ask them to get started. We need to scale up the fight for democracy way beyond sort of standalone voter registration drives or people that save us. If we don't start to incorporate it in everything we do, you know, restaurants that offer people voter registration papers, let's go to those restaurants and buy the food there and tweet about how great they are for doing that. We have to start to really amp up the sort of incentive and the rewarding and the thinking about all that we can do to lift democracy so that we're battling people who are fighting democracy every single day with much more man and woman power than we have traditionally. So with that, I'll close with this great quote from John Lewis, who said, freedom is not a state, it is an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society. That's, I think, how we all have to start thinking about this fight for democracy we're in. And with that, I will stop sharing, and I know that was a lot, and open up to any questions, comments, perspectives you have, or just, commentary.
That was
Stop here. Here we
awesome.
go.
That was really great. Thank you so much. The comments are people are inspired, freaked out, all the things. So we do have some questions that are in the Q&A, and how about I just read a couple?
Sure, great.
All right, cool. So this one's from Anne. She says, she asks, do you think it might be possible to get rid of the Republicans' trifecta government in Texas?
I don't, I worry that they're probably pretty gerrymandered. I don't know Texas that well. I think Beto. So one of the most important take homes from my book that I don't think I focused on is, and this is going to sound funny, almost everything I just said, I would not use in a 30-second ad if I were running for statewide office. But the key take home to winning elections in Texas and Ohio is that basically these state houses are going to automatically generate disastrous public outcomes because they're essentially one massive, the MO of these places is they take public assets and public resources like our public school money and they transfer it to private. That's what they do. That's literally what the direction of these places is. It's one direction. And with that comes bad healthcare, schools falling apart, infrastructure terrible, just negative public outcomes. It's endemic to their broken system. And my challenge to anyone running for state office like Beto O'Rourke, and he's doing it very well, is don't talk about everything I just talked about. It'll sound too partisan. It'll sound too insider. People think everyone's corrupt in politics these days, so you don't win that much. Focus on the outcomes that are terrible that affect everyday people. In Kansas, we have a Democratic governor of Kansas. Why? Because they had 4 days of school in Kansas. And that was an outrage. That was her campaign. In Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, she could have said everything I just said. What'd she say? Fix the damn roads. People understood their roads were falling apart because they were being underinvested in. Beto O'Rourke right now is running on the fact that the energy grid was privatized and people froze in Texas in the winter. Shocking. So I think he's got a shot because he's a dynamic candidate. Abbott continues to do everything we just talked about. And Beto is focused on the kind of public outcomes that allow a lot of my message to be communicated in a way that has much broader appeal than people who are only thinking about democracy. Although I wish we all did. Other people are thinking about their schools, their roads, and staying warm in the wintertime. So I don't know about the trifecta. I don't want to speak to Texas. I would say my main answer would be the plan needs to be, how do we win that over time? The way that's, and right now, my guess is the best chance of starting that is Beto winning the governor's race. And then you run in every district in Texas and you get enough money into each of their hands so that they can make an argument. Most of them will lose, but they will lift Beto by all running and they'll start to get a different message in all those corners. And so the goal is Virginia flipped its state house a couple of years back. It took 2 cycles, many more candidates running, many more women running, much more diversity on the ballot. And over several cycles, they beat the gerrymander. I think that's more in Stacey's model in Georgia. So my guess is not in one cycle, but we don't want to think about one cycle. We want to think about the overtime long game. So if they come closer in 22 and they narrow those losses, keep going, run again, celebrate everything they did, congratulate them. Don't walk away as if they failed. The next, I don't want, I could go on for a while and then I will.
Oh no, I mean, you're super inspiring and it's so late there and I love it. And I'm super grateful. And I know that everybody here is also. So this one's from Mike G. I'm in a blue district in a blue state. What's the most effective way to make a difference?
So, and Annalisa, the big story I was going to tell about Ohio, but I ran out of time, is the reason we've so far stopped gerrymandering is we focused like a laser on judicial elections. We took a 7-0 Republican Supreme Court in 18 and within 2 years made it 3-3. And the Chief Justice is a moderate Republican. That's why the map was struck down 2 weeks ago, because we focused on races when the Republicans were running around celebrating Donald Trump. So these judicial elections are a massive lever over democracy. And I highlight that in the book. So I think the best thing that, no, in Ohio, when I was chair, I'd always say, we love political tourism. Now come to Ohio. And we had a lot of people who did that. It really does help. So if you have any fondness for any states or contacts there, you know, going there and knocking on doors and going there and campaigning in the end helps. But I'd say earlier than that, you know, these days there's a lot of phone banking that you can do. There are a lot of organizations that you probably know of, Sister District. There's a states project that I think, and one of the best things about my book so far is all these people who like what I'm saying are coming and saying, we've been doing this and no one knows, or no one cares about what we're doing. And I look at them and say, you're doing exactly what we need to do. So one of the field team 6, I was on a call with them the other day, for example. There's a group called the States Project, and this might be something you want to look at, depending on an interest in giving. They create what they call donor circles, and that circle of donors raises money, and with the group that I'm talking about, takes the money and funds 7 or 8 swing districts in a state legislature. And they call it the majority maker offices. And they have raised they have them all over the country now, mainly in blue states. They have raised tons of money. And I'm telling you, if you had a donor circle say, hey, we've got, you know, X amount of money for your 6 or 7 swing districts in Ohio, I'd say hallelujah. So there's fundraising like that. There is, and then one other thing that I'm going to push out very shortly that I think is really important is there are the swing districts, and then there's everybody. And one of the things that I want to do, and I'll send this to you when I do it, there's a very good project in Missouri, okay, a very good model, where they convince enough people to give $5 or $10 a month, subscribers, and that adds up over years to be enough so that anybody who runs for state house in Missouri gets a baseline of support. And what they have found through this is, to me, it's the right thing to do because these people are running in tough districts. We can't recruit people and then turn away. But secondly, we know that for every state house district that's challenged, with enough money to actually say something, it lifts turnout for everybody. It helps Stacey Abrams. It helps Beto O'Rourke. So I love that, that states project, you got it up there. One thing I love about this other model is it lets us say what I'm saying in my book. We want to support people running in every district in Ohio, not recruit for every district, recruit and support. But big donors aren't going to do that. We need to have like a broader, low dollar. Remember, we have to take the billions that we spend in the presidential year and keep spending a whole lot of it in that presidential year. But we got to roll the rest of the money into a more consistent support of all levels of democracy in all states. And are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, I thought you froze. You froze for a second. I just.
I did. Oh, no. No, but we have
lots of. And so, you know, Diane just wrote "Run for Something." We need to bring support behind "Run for Something" so that everyone who runs gets enough support to run a campaign that actually communicates. And that's something I hope to build, because I think that would be a massive change. You know, gerrymandering is terrible, but even worse than gerrymandering is not contesting 20 or 30 districts in a state. It's the greatest gift of all time to these, you know, mini autocrats that they don't even have anyone running in their district that says what they're doing wrong. But we're only going to get that if we start supporting these people with more resources than we do.
Thank you. So in a blue state, in a blue district, what do you suggest is the most effective way?
I think the states project, states project is, you know, people are saying you can hunt down the swing districts that you want. I think states project is a very good way. And by the way, Run for Something is a great place as well. And I'm happy to make an introduction, by the way, with the states project. If you said, we as a group, we would love to adopt a state and play a role in trying to flip a state house or pick up 7 seats. Contest every race is another good one. I can make that introduction because that would be the most coordinated versus each of you hunting down like those swing districts in some states.
Okay.
The other would be, and again, I'll set it up. I'm working on this now. I do think the idea that we all say we have to help people running in every district. not just train them, but give them enough money. And, we all talk in democratic world. We don't do well in rural areas. Well, that's because we don't have candidates there. And if we do, they don't have enough money to say anything. So we have to fix that. And that's one reason I'm trying to set up something that does that. The good
Great.
news, by the way, there are a lot of programs doing everything I'm talking about, but they're too small. And rather than being one-off programs, it needs to imbue the philosophy of the whole Democratic side. It's got to be the whole approach, as opposed to we have one program, this program, that. The other side doesn't think about it that way, and we shouldn't either.
Yeah. No, great. So this question is from Gabby. What progressive groups, locally, nationally, do you recommend to, quote, vet candidates for lower positions like council, district, school boards, judges, etc.?
I mean, I think right now I'd say Run for Something is doing a good job. And I think States Project, I don't want to say any other groups are out there too. I don't know them as well.
So
I really believe in those groups, and the more support they get, the better. But
Great.
what I like about States Project is they would say to you, listen, there are 8 candidates in this state. They're in pretty good races. We're going to raise a lot of money to help them. And if they win, we either flip the state house or we get close.
Mhm.
So they do a lot of the work that you would otherwise have to do yourself. So that's why, to me, they're very good.
Great. Okay, cool. Timothy are you good on time? You doing
I'm
okay?
great. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. He said he has a possible solution in ruby red districts, register Republican, then field moderates GOP primaries, since the primaries are the only real elections. Would you favor that kind of tactic?
I mean, if you're a Democrat registering as a Republican, in some states you could get yourself in trouble. Now people did it. One reason Kasich won the primary in Ohio was a lot of Democrats were so worried about Trump. In Ohio, you can go back and forth, but technically you are swearing on, taking an oath that you are a Republican. So encouraging it could be problematic. But I mean, that's up to people to do. One other thing I'd say is, and this is getting a little more into the weeds, there are reforms that I think some of these states, if they continue to go downhill, like I'm saying, there are reforms that could get you into kind of ranked choice type reforms that take some of the pressure off these primaries from being so crazy. Like our Ohio Senate primary right now is insane if you're watching it. The JD Vance is the most famous guy in it, but it's a battle to the right like nothing I've ever seen. If you had a system where, and there's a group trying to do this in Missouri this year. If you had a system where you had everyone in one primary and the top 4 people from that primary went to a general, and then the winner of that general was the winning candidate through a simplified ranked choice, the incentives in that primary to get to the top 4, where everyone's on the same primary, it's not a Republican Democrat, your behavior would be far more normal because you wouldn't be battling to the extreme. You'd actually be, now maybe one person would, but a bunch of others would say, well, most people don't believe in all that crazy stuff. I'm going to be in the lane that is much bigger. So I think I think there's also a way to reform these primaries that are really so much of the source of the out of control extremism. And I talked to a group recently that's looking at running a ballot initiative in Missouri to do this. And I think it'll be this year. And it could be the kind of template that other states could take up to get rid of the extremism that is so exploding in these primaries. Where again, if you watch Ohio or Missouri, I mean, you're seeing just insanity run amok in these primaries.
Wow, this is a great information. Thank you. Are there any current lawsuits based on Article 4, Section 4?
I love this question. Here's why the question's so good. The court has ruled for a century that the guarantee clause, and lawyers will know this term, is a political question. And the courts cannot, a political question is for Congress to decide. So if we tried to sue, and this has happened, if you tried to sue a gerrymandered state and you went to the Supreme Court and you said, they are violating the guarantee clause, the court would say, sorry, That's not for us to decide. That's for Congress to decide. Now, that's frustrated people who brought those suits. At the same time, it means if Congress were to act on the guarantee clause, the court couldn't overturn it because they have said that's not our decision. So I believe if the court, now we know this court's a little bit worrisome, so maybe they would reverse 100 years of precedent. But if the Congress were to say, hey, we're changing the rules about gerrymandering because we believe strongly that the guarantee clause is not being enforced and we must enforce it, the court is supposed to say, we can't even look at that law. So it's an immense power by Congress that that is supposed to be, and has been for a century, something that the Supreme Court won't review, which means it's an immense power. I just put a link to an article I wrote on this about the founders and the guarantee clause being the source of an immense power to, in the end of the day, like this is, as much as I'm passionate about voting rights, everything we're seeing is about the guarantee clause. The debate is not just about the individual right to vote. It's about the fact that these state governments are no longer democracies. As much as that sounds dramatic, it's just the case. And that's why the implication of the guarantee clause, that's the most relevant clause to all this. And you all may know this. The guarantee clause was most actively, relevant after the Civil War, because as Southern states tried to re-enter the Union, the Congress would basically say, we're going to look at your constitutions to make sure you are a Republican form of government, and only then will we allow you back in. So it's been something that's been acted upon before. And there was one election this is an amazing precedent, in the mid to late 1800s, where they so suppressed the black vote in a Southern state that the Congress refused to sit the quote unquote winning white Southerner, because they said that was not an election that reflects the Republican form of government. And they said, based on our guarantee clause power, we refuse to seat you. So it's something that is a very strong power that I think should ground a lot of what they do now, especially if they're worried the court might overturn it.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't mean to wonk out there, but that's my most non-law part of my book.
No, wonking out is perfectly great. This one's from Jed. He's saying the fascist faction maintains a wealth of wealthy and constantly funded raising nonprofits, both C4 and C3, that pay people to do the work of keeping their movement strong. How do groups populated by legions of volunteers match that kind of compensated discipline?
That's a great question. And this is why it's not good. This is why I really resist when people say, and we've had important Democrats say this, we'll just out-organize everything they're doing. We need our federal representatives to do their job, because simply, and I go through this in the book, some of this bylaw suppression is too much for everyone to just overcome by volunteer efforts. Like the purging of millions of voters in Ohio, and I walk through the book how brutal that purging is. We can all volunteer as hard as we want to, but we need to meet that purging by the force of law at the federal government. And if all we do is keep sending out volunteers, go fight it one more time, go fight it one more time, at some point it's going to fail, and then we're lost. Right. So we all need to fight. And if we don't fight, we're going to lose too. But we can never let off the pressure on the most extreme level of purging and suppression. And this is why I refuse to stop insisting that the federal government does their job. If I saw Chuck Schumer tomorrow, get on out there, do it again. Do a standing filibuster. If Chuck Grassley and Josh Hawley don't like this, make them stand for a freaking week and keep debating. And when they finally get tired, pass the damn thing. If this is a fight for democracy, act like it. Don't do business as normal. That's one of the biggest parts of my book. There's too much normalcy. Treating this as politics as usual legitimizes what is a deeply illegitimate attack on democracy at multiple levels. And we have to stop being polite about it. We need to stop sort of exhibiting senatorial decorum. Decorum is fine if they're acting normally. None of this is normal. I love that the Texas legislators left Texas because they were sending a message. This is not like anything else. This is like another country attacking democracy. And so one answer is, I don't think we can just say to volunteers, keep fighting the fight that the people we've elected to fight refuse to fight. And we'll fight harder. And again, we have to. But I worry that they keep saying it as if that the same voters, often Black voters, are going to just keep saving everyone else. It's not right. And in the end, it doesn't work. And I put that in my book. The Clinton campaign and tons of volunteers registered thousands of voters in Ohio in 2016 that were purged. And with that Herculean effort, they didn't come close to the number that had been purged. And in the meantime, they weren't talking to registered voters or swing voters because they were at every street corner trying to register purge voters. So not only do you not have enough power to overcome it, but you're taking away from other things you also have to do for winning campaigns. So I do think that we have to, first, that's one answer. The second is, and this is why I talk about, we need to harness much more of what we do every day to lift democracy and not just view it as a side volunteer project. If you run why do we only register people at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles? That's just random in the end. I'm glad people get them when they get their license, but there's no reason why every business that believes in democracy, small business, a restaurant, a barbershop, they can register people too. We need to bring into the sort of the bloodstream of everything we do every day, the mission of lifting democracy. So it's not some side volunteer effort when the day is over, but it's actually part of what we do every day. So again, where should we do that? Public housing, public transportation. And I don't say this to be negative about other people. I was a city council member. I didn't think about it. I worked hard to get people to know about the earned income tax credit, but I didn't say register them to vote. Every rec center in the city of Cincinnati should have voter registration papers at that front desk. Every library, you name it, early vote papers. So one answer to that question is, don't leave it only on the volunteers. Bring every nonprofit that gets, if I was a city official now, I'd say every nonprofit who gets money from me to serve the people of Cincinnati should include in their mission statement, lifting democracy, registering voters, because their constituents are the ones being purged by the state officials. So we got to incorporate it more into everything we do and not simply dump it on, volunteers to do on their extra time or weekends. At some point, as much as important as that is, it's not enough. I'm going to put up one thing real quick. I told you to do this when I started. Everything I say is my book and then some, and I'd love everyone to read my book. Here, though, I started this yesterday. I'm kind of testing this out. If you text my last name, Pepper, to this number, you'll get an email if you fill it out that sends you a free introduction to my book. So you can get my book is all about storytelling. This is not some academic or sort of legal treatise. It's all about the storytelling of how this stuff plays out on the ground. You'll get a sense of that in this introduction. So if you're not ready to buy the book yet, which I hope everyone does, you write a book like this, you want people to read it. At the very least, if you text that, you'll get an intro that kind of gives you a taste of it that I think will make you interested. So send a text here if you're interested. I'd love it if people did that. I'm trying to test it out to get the word out more than I have so far. Next question.
Okay, great. So this is from Ruth. This is terrific and inspiring, but what do we do about the gerrymandering and the blippity blank Supreme Court? About the Alabama thing.
Yeah, that was a tragedy. And I teach this stuff, and the history of how they deal with gerrymandering is so sickening, because they let it happen. They know it's terrible. And that's a loss. And that's a loss that I'm afraid right now is irreversible. And I'm open to ideas about the court being reformed. because we are stuck in a way, and they did get away with murder in the way they got themselves their 6-3 majority. But I would also say, in Alabama, just keep fighting, run hard in those other districts, make as much noise as you can. But no, that was a tough one. I mean, the thing I'm proud of in Ohio, and this is what I'd say to Oklahoma, to Alabama, we were in the same situation. You saw my numbers, 12-4 guaranteed the decade, even though we were 50-50 basically. We didn't have one Republican. We didn't have one Democrat statewide official. We had Sherrod Brown. We didn't have money that we needed to do a big effort, but we had people power. I mentioned indivisible when I started. And we went out and we changed our constitution twice. And some states can do this, some can't. And we rewrote the rules of how you draw districts in the state of Ohio. And they won 75-25 at the polls. And so our constitution now requires fair districts. And then we changed our court. So they are, and again, I don't know the rules of how they changed their constitution, but they are where we were. And again, knock on wood, our battle's still happening. It's still in court. But we took that horrible moment, stared at it for a couple of years, and then put together one of the great underdog stories you'll ever see. I had the big Democratic people tell me, oh, you don't have any money to collect signatures? This will never work. And I said, well, I see like dozens of indivisible groups protesting every day. I think they'd actually go get signatures without us having to pay them millions. They looked at me like I was crazy. Well, I was right. So, I mean, I think that with these setbacks, you just have to take a step back and do what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, did what they did in Virginia, where they overcame a gerrymander there. And one other thing I'd say, and this is a key point of the book, as much as I hate what happened in that case, and it's repetitive, but I'll just say it again. The key to their system is the gerrymandering of the state houses. Think about it as, the old war analogy. That's their high ground. They get away with everything else they do. The gerrymandering in Congress, the crazy Texas Roe v. Wade, vigilante law, the gun. They get away with all this because at the heart of it, they know they will never be held accountable in their own lives. And so the most important thing to do to start the battle back is to fix the gerrymandering of the state houses, which is the best way to start correcting all the other consequences of that gerrymandering. And so as important as it is to focus on the congressional, it's even more important to start unrigging these state houses. Not that you'll necessarily be a blue state all of a sudden, but so at least these people feel like they're accountable in some way for doing crazy things. And so you can start fielding candidates to challenge them. I'm going to put the link to my book up here too while we're talking. I know a few people are checking off. Other questions?
Cool. Yeah, somebody or a lot of people are asking if they could get a copy of your slideshow.
I'm supposed to be able to do that. I can, you know what? I will send it to you.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
here's my only plea. Like, don't let it replace reading the whole book because it's just a snippet. And I mean, again, I know I'm a broken record, but I think you'll feel it when you read it. And I worry the slideshow is like, okay, I saw it, everything. No, it's go further in. Thank you, John B. That's awesome.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll get it to you.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. I had to join late due to another commitment. Is there a plan to send out materials? Okay, we just answered that. Yes,
if I send an email to you, Michelle, you can
yes.
Get it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll send it out and I'll send out the recording also. Let's see. How can we find out? This is from UFun. How can we find out more about the state house's candidates before casting votes in an election? There was so little information about them that I never know whether I was electing the right people.
I mean, these days I would say you get the broad. If you're talking about in your own district, in your own part of the world, I mean, I would that's one where you can find that out. But it's a good question. Most people don't even bother. I would check them out. I would look. There's some sort of neutral guides, but these days, get online, look at them on Twitter, and you can kind of see who they really are. If it's your own district, I think that's generally pretty easy. When it's where can we help in other states, I think that's when you can rely on other groups to help you.
All right, good still. You good, David?
I'm good. Yeah. By the
All
way,
right,
I'm going to
great.
put my email up here too, in case if
Okay.
anyone ever here has a group, a book club, an activist group separate from you, and you want to do something like this, go ahead and email me. I was going to say,
Um,
League of Women Voters always has a guide. Sometimes
yeah.
those may be a little bit like, so neutral to not be that helpful. So I would dig a little further, but
We
yeah, they always have a guide.
Our Indivisible group and a lot of other progressive groups do guides usually every election, and we put together a grid. I don't know if Lorraine Lundquist is on this call. I think I saw her name earlier, but she is very helpful putting together these grids in comparison and really
Perfect.
breaking it down. Yeah. So this is from Madeline in Sebastopol. Am I saying that right? What is the best way to get national DNC to get on board with all the state perspectives?
So what's interesting is watching some weird traffic outside my house here. So Jamie Harrison is a friend of mine. He was the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. He gets everything I just said. The problem is we need the broader higher ups, the people giving a lot of money, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. We need all of this in unison, because the head of the DNC can't do it if everyone isn't saying do it. So it really has to be, and this is sort of, I mean, I've tried to send my book to people. Jamie Harrison's quoted in my book. He tweets out stuff I say about it. He gets it, but it's got to be. And by the way, if you follow Jamie on Twitter, he's always putting stuff out on the accomplishments. But and by the way, this is my Twitter handle. I'm always doing whiteboard videos. If you follow me, I always am presenting stuff that people seem to like. It's got to be a broader decision. But here's an example. The other day, they announced this big investment in the DSCC, the DCCC, and it was huge, and it's great. But I thought, what about the DLCC? What about the state level? Because if all we do is the federal game, they are winning and we are losing. And we have to get beyond a couple of these committees and start saying, if we're doing the House and the Senate, but we aren't starting to invest much more deeply at all levels, we're repeating the same mistakes that have them always beating us. And I think, and so one of the things I'm trying to do, and in my own little mission here, and by the way, I wrote this book to try and like say all this to anyone who would listen. And my hope is, and I've had some calls with some substantial donors who literally are saying, we agree, where should we start investing to do this? And that investment needs, by the way, the other people who agree with everything we're saying, for the most part, are all the state chairs. They're begging for more infrastructure back in states. But a lot of it will follow the money. I know this is a little bit just off the top of my head, but I put it in the book. If you took 5% of the money in a presidential year and spread it out over 4 years in 50 states, you would make a massive difference in what I'm talking about. It'd be, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think you'd actually make your change to win the presidency higher, because you've built infrastructure and fielded candidates in district after district after district. And my guess is if someone who's been part of that presidential process heard that, they'd say, that's crazy, David. Who would ever do that? You know what my answer would be? The Koch brothers. That's what they did. That's what Karl Rove did. They made that decision, and it worked, and it's working like a charm. Karl Rove flipped a bunch of states in 2010 when no one was looking on a $30 million budget. That's in the grand scheme of presidentials, that's a tiny amount. And he flipped it. So we have to round out the investment and get it deeper on the ground than what we've seen. And like I said, and by the way, this doesn't just go for the biggest donors. This goes, and this is why the broader sort of mass communication is important. This is why I emphasize people reading. And in my book, I say, please share my book. Like it sounds self-serving, but people need to see it. We have certain Senate candidates that get $150 million in low dollar contributions online in Kentucky. And by the way, I don't fault them. They're trying to win. But we need our grassroots donors to think they're as excited to help support state ledge candidates in all districts as they are one U.S. Senate candidate in one state we're probably not going to win. So we need to, the low dollar potential is enormous, but we need to be smart enough to talk to all these people in a way that they understand, get excited about a $10 monthly contribution that goes to a pot of money that means we support every candidate running in this country at the state level, as opposed to only doing it for 3 Senate seats that we may not even win, but we don't like Mitch McConnell, so we do it. So we have to educate the low dollar repeat. That's where the power is. And that's something that's one of the ideas I'm trying to like expand that's working in some states.
That's awesome. Okay. I love that. So this is from John B. Are the Democratic elite acting on the basis of your argument?
I think people are waking up to it.
Okay.
But I don't think we're not where we need to be. I mean, here's an example of an elite who is Eric Holder. We've mentioned some groups on here. Eric Holder has run the NRDC, the redistricting group. They've been very helpful. But it's like a one-off project. The other side doesn't have a separate group. It's their whole mindset. So I don't think the mindset is where it needs to be about democracy. And that's what this battle is about. And I still think there's more siloing about this group and that group, and federal is still probably, of course we want to win these federal races. I want to win Tim Ryan's seat. We've got to do that. But we also have to not have it be so overwhelming that we also aren't just instinctually saying, okay, what state houses can we win this year? Who's the candidate? How do we help them? How do we encourage everyone to run? Because we're thinking about that next federal cycle and not the broader. And that again, Dusky just wrote this, like that's how we're not there yet. And the announcement the other day about big chunks for the DCCC and DSCC, and those two alone has made me think, well, there we are. That's federal. That's not the depth that we need. And that's not a criticism. It's just sort of where we're not yet where I think we need to be. And I'll just say this again, this is why I wrote the book so quickly. And the other side has a massive head start. They've been doing this and perfecting this for years. And so we don't only have to get in the game, we got to get in the game now.
Yeah.
I literally tried I have a publisher of my novels, Putnam. It's a great publisher. I tried to get this book. I talked to publishers, like the big 5 publishers about this book. And they all said, well, some of them said at least, hey, the concept's interesting, but we couldn't get it out until, mid-late of this year. And I said, well, that's too late. I had to get it out last year. People need to know this stuff. So I used a company in Ohio that I've done before that got it out quicker, immediately. That's how much I was urgent about getting the message out a lot earlier than your traditional 1-year lag in publishing. This is urgent. And that's why I'll speak to any group that I can to help spread the word.
That's awesome. Thank you. What about writing letters to the editor of local papers?
If you're in a big city, I'm not sure that maybe people read that, but in small towns, absolutely. But the amount of people in a small town, Ohio, it's like it's a news story that, hey, so someone wrote this and it said this about so-and-so. Yeah, I mean, we really encourage that. The other one is, it depends on the community, but some people, I mean, and sometimes I literally have to tell a candidate, don't worry, that was only one Facebook post criticizing you. It's not the end of your campaign. So in some communities, basically being truth tellers on social media or your Facebook page, if there's a lot of disinformation out there, posting regularly what's really happening, maybe a little out of your comfort zone if you're not all that political on your Facebook page, that's important. I put that in the book. We're all messengers. We have communities that trust our opinion. You're all political insiders in a way. So, letters to the editor in some places, people really read those. And what you do on social media also really gets a lot of attention. My dad was a business guy in Cincinnati for a long time, kind of a moderate. People were surprised when I was a Democrat, to be honest. He posts things quite seriously on Facebook in a much less partisan way than I ever would. People read them very seriously and they consider it. And I think that, he has a community that listens to him, and he posts stuff very thoughtfully. And I think all of us can do that with the people who listen to us.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have about 5 more minutes of your
Okay.
time, and I'll see if I
By
can
the
get
way, I'm going
some
to be
more
in
of these.
LA on Sunday for a big football game, so maybe we could do a tailgate or something.
Oh my God. Is there a
Yeah.
football game on Sunday?
Yeah.
Wow. It's about time. So let's see. This is from Renee Grace Rodriguez. She said, but it isn't true that the Democratic Party, but isn't it true, sorry, that the Democratic Party is also benefiting and is not a source of help to end the autocracy?
I mean, I hope that's not true. I mean, so I get that in writing this book. I don't believe, I mean, respectfully, I think Democrats are the ones pushing for democracy. Look at the, Republicans are now complaining about New York State gerrymandering, right? And by the way, just so it's clear, in my book, I'm very clear. Gerrymandering is bad wherever it happens. Gerrymandering leads to terrible results, bad government, etc. And how do we know who's for it or against it? The federal law, For the People Act, would make it so no one could gerrymander. Democrats support it, Republicans don't. So I don't really get into the both sides stuff. Democrats have a lot of work to do in their own states. And to your question, you'd agree with the part of my book where I say, when we're in power, we need to live by what we're saying. We need to live our values. It's not good enough that New York State is in the hands of Democrats. They need to make sure they encourage people to vote. And if they have laws that aren't doing that, shame on them, fix that. But at the same time, I think that, Democrats are generally, the side fighting for democracy. And sometimes even when it's against potentially their own short-term interests. And we better be. And if we aren't, then we're going to definitely lose our democracy. I mean, I think, and this goes back to a slide I went over quickly. A number of things motivate me to keep going as much as I do, and I know you are. One is the history is so stark that if there is a repeated attack on democracy at the state level and people stop resisting, the history is clear that you will lose and they will win. And the best example of that is Jim Crow. For 20 years after African Americans started voting in the South, and they were voting in big numbers in the South, big numbers. There were more registered Black voters in Louisiana 1870s than white voters. They were electing Black congresspeople and state house leaders and all that. But there was, like there always in America, a backlash to that diverse democracy that was building. We see it like clockwork. And for about 20 years, people fought back and they resisted that white backlash. But in about the 1880s and 90s, the federal government, the local resistance to that attack on democracy, it just weakened. And within 10 years, all those registered Black voters were off the rolls. Louisiana went from like 140,000 to 700. Every Black official gone. If you were 25 years old, you had Black officials that were elected all around you. Once you became 40 for the rest of life, you'd never see one again. The point is, if you stop resisting, we can lose this thing. And my kids who are sleeping, who are 5 and 7, could spend the rest of their lives trying to claw it back. That's how serious it is right now. And that's how I think it's not the best way to motivate, but it's the reality. And we've seen it that if the resistance against state level attacks on democracy weakens, those attacks succeed. And that scares me into continuing.
Yeah. Thank you. I know I'm actually a delegate for California, and I see that there's some other delegates on here too. And we have a super majority in our legislature, but they will not pass things that are very popular, like single payer health care, or, things like closing down Aliso Canyon, which I live by, which was the biggest gas blowout in history. How do we address that? That's my question. I think that might be the last question. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry,
mean,
everybody.
I don't know California politics well enough to address it. I mean, I don't know the legislature I actually know a member of it. I happen to go to law school with Rob Bonta, who's now your attorney general. So I've been a fan of his for a long time, but I don't know enough about California to say, but I do think that, if legislatures are gerrymandered by either side, they're generally not ideal. And I don't know the sense of accountability in the California legislature. I can't say enough to respond to the question because I don't know the scene, but if there's a sense that it's an unaccountable group, there's gonna be frustration on either side. And that's why I am for fair districts, whoever is impacted. I'm a huge believer in this federal Freedom to Vote Act because it would create rules that would create accountability at all levels of legislatures so that they are actually responsive. And I also believe that within states, you should be insisting, and maybe you have that, I don't know, you should be insisting on districts where politicians do feel, and you guys have been more reform minded. I see that from Libby. And so maybe that hasn't solved it, but all states need to figure out how to de-rig these places so there's more accountability. And I think in the end, then what they do ends up reflecting the popular will more than if these places are set up in a way that they're literally unaccountable to voters.
Yeah. All right. Well, I certainly appreciate your time, and I'm sure that everybody else here does as well. Gotten a lot of private texts that you are awesome, and oh my God, and yeah, all kinds of really good stuff. So we'll send out the recording of this, and we will also send out the PowerPoint.
I'll send the slides.
Yep, I'll send them out.
So I'm going to add a feature to these where people text something and they get them emailed to them, but I haven't done that yet. But I think that that sounds like I was amazed by how many people wanted the slides. So we'll do that. No, well, can I just say thank you very much? I really appreciate the conversation. Like I said, I appreciate what you're doing, and I try and spell out the reality so that all the work we do is put to its best sort of use, and all of our energy to its best use. And my sense from this group is you're very energized. Let's just keep fighting. And if I could be a resource, if any of you have questions, introductions to like that states project, I'm happy to do that, because I'd love to see your energy help us, not just in California, but all over the country. We need states like Ohio need that help.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll definitely be in touch. I would love to help mobilize.
Awesome.
Or do whatever I need to do. So thank you so much. Go to bed.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate you.
Really fun.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
There.